Everybody, welcome to the video. This is my final picks for Week 17 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look we do earlier in the week. I don't have line building on Friday and core plays on Saturday if you do want to check those out. But if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you would like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. I don't just cover NFL. I'm here for the NBA on Patreon only, but the MLB and NASCAR seasons as well here on YouTube. So if you think that sounds cool and you want to check it out, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And if you do want to check out the Patreon, lots of extra content over there, my entire spreadsheets, projections, optimizers, ownership projections. I would wait until the first of the month though, which is either on Saturday or Sunday if you do want to check that out. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you sign over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100. Use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I do highly recommend it. Love playing over on Prize Picks in addition to whatever I do on DraftKings each and every single weekend. So make sure you hit the link down below or head over to prizepicks.com. Use code CPEN and have a good time over there. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we will start with the quarterback position. And this week, it is deep. There's a lot of good plays. I left off several. I had to make some cuts just because I want to talk about 15 quarterbacks on this video. So if there's a quarterback you like that's not on here, there's probably a good chance I like them. I just don't want to talk about 20 quarterbacks and be here for an hour. But there is several great options, whether you want to go up top or right in the middle, maybe down low. Jimmy Garoppolo might ruin the Trey Lance play this weekend, which would be an absolute shame because he really opens up the slate below $5,000. So that's kind of a wait and see situation right there. But we'll go up top. Josh Allen, $8,000, facing the Falcons, 29th DVA versus the pass, 29th versus quarterbacks this year. He has that built-in rushing floor. They throw the ball a ton. He should probably get around 300 passing yards in this game and hopefully 40 plus on the ground. If he does that, he'll be a fantastic play. It's just really a matter of if the touchdowns show up. But I would not be surprised if they do here versus the Falcons at home. The only concern would be the 14.5 point spread in the Bills' favor. So it probably will be a blowout versus the Atlanta Falcons. They're not a very good team, and Buffalo's got a pretty solid defense. Falcons offense not very good, but we have a near 30-point implied team total for the Bills here. Even if they do blow out the Falcons, there's probably a good chance Josh Allen got there anyway. So I do like Allen in all formats. I think he's fine in cash. I think he's fine in tournaments. Now for me, I'd probably try to find some more value in cash games, so I'm probably going to lean for Allen more so in tournaments. But either way, I do think he's a great play and pretty easy to stack him up with any of his pass catchers, specifically Stephon Diggs, but really anybody works. Patrick Mahomes, $7,800. This is going to be one of the more popular games of the week, especially in tournaments. In cash games, it's kind of hard to get there because all these guys are expensive. All the Chiefs are expensive. All the Bengals are expensive. And in cash games, we're not really chasing ceilings. We're just kind of playing the optimal build. And none of the Chiefs guys really show up too much. Maybe Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce pop a little bit. Potentially T. Higgins. But outside of that, you're kind of forcing them in for tournament lineups. But I think it's fine. We have a 51-point over-under here. 5-point spread. They're on the road in Cincy. Patrick Mahomes, I mean, he's had some bad games this year for sure, but for the most part, he's been pretty good all season long fantasy-wise, and I think that continues here versus the Bengals. I wouldn't say it's a cakewalk matchup or anything, but still 20th versus quarterbacks and 22nd DVA versus the pass. So I think the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes will be just fine. Tom Brady, $7,600, probably once again without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin for sure. Mike Evans is currently on the COVID list, assuming he's going to be out because he's also dealing with a hamstring injury. But I think he'll be just fine because he's facing the Jets. Like, him and Antonio Brown should be able to do all the damage they need to do. They also have Tyler Johnson, Scotty Miller, Rob Gronkowski. I think Tom Brady will be just fine. Only $7,600. Facing the Jets, who have a terrible defense. I know fantasy-wise are really giving it up to the run this season, which I do like Ronald Jones quite a bit. But they're still dead last 32nd DVA versus the pass and still 22nd versus quarterback. So Tom Brady, who hasn't really been amazing for DFS the past couple of weeks, I think is in a nice bounce back spot versus the Jets here. Matthew Stafford versus Baltimore defense that just got lit up for over 500 passing yards last week. On the season, they're 30th DVA versus the pass, allowing the second most points per game to the quarterback position, only behind the Washington football team this year. And I don't see why Matthew Stafford can't have a good game here. I mean, defensively versus the pass this season, the Ravens have struggled. They're allowing the second most points per game to quarterbacks, 30th DVA versus the pass. Matthew Stafford's averaging around 300 passing yards and 2.5 passing touchdowns per game this year on 8.1 yards per attempt. He's got Cooper Kupp to get the ball to, who's a fantastic play this week. You have Van Jefferson, Odell Beckham Jr., Tyler Higbee. So I think Matthew Stafford is $7,100. Even though he did struggle last week versus the Minnesota Vikings, I think he's still a pretty solid play. Justin Herbert is pretty much a price play for me. I don't love the matchup versus Denver, but it does help that they're playing at home. But only $1,600 for a guy like Herbert, who has a little bit of rushing upside, and obviously has all the passing talent in the world. No Mike Williams once again, which kind of does suck, but you still have Keenan Allen, Joshua Palmer, Jared Cook to get the ball too. Austin Eckler will be back this week in a 26-point implied team total. So even though the matchup's not great versus Denver, I think he's fine because of the price point. Should probably be in that 7K range. Dak Prescott, $6,700. Not a cakewalk matchup here versus Arizona, but this game is definitely one of the better ones to target because it has a 52-point over-under, which is currently the highest on the slate. I believe only 2 games right now have totals above 50. Chiefs and the Bengals, and again, we're talking about right here with the Cowboys. 28.75 implied team total, 5.5 point spread, so it should be pretty back and forth for the most part. The Cardinals definitely have the worst defense of the two in this game, so I think it's the better one to attack. And both teams play at a pretty high pace, and Dak Prescott's been, for the most part, very solid this season. But like I said, not a cakewalk matchup. 5th DVA versus the pass, the Cardinals are, and also allowing the 5th fewest points per game to fantasy quarterbacks. But the Cowboys have been very stingy as well. But there should be a lot of points scored in this game, and I mean, 2 solid offenses. I usually give the advantage to elite talent anyway over a tougher matchup, so I think Dak at this price point, you can stack him up with CeeDee Lamb, Murray Cooper, Dalton Schultz, Michael Gallup, whoever you prefer, so don't mind him in tournaments. Probably not going to get there in cash games. Although a good cash game play, I think, is Jalen Hurts at $6,600 if we can't have Trey Lance. It's kind of like the same thing as Trey Lance. He's just more expensive and I guess more established. The last time he faced Washington, which was a couple of weeks ago, had a fantastic game. And obviously the rushing upside's there for Jalen Hurts. That's why we like him in cash, because he has that built-in rushing floor, which even if he has a terrible day through the air, which he typically does, he still has that built-in rushing floor, which can save him. Had a couple touchdowns last week, none through the ground. Didn't really do anything on the ground, which kind of limited his upside. Still around 16, 17 fantasy points, but Washington is the team that you want quarterbacks against. They're allowing the most points per game to the position. They're 27th DVA versus the pass. Jalen Hurts should be just fine in this matchup. If we don't have Trey Lance, he's probably the next best thing in cash. As for right now, I'm not going to make any final decisions yet, but Jalen Hurts definitely one of the better cash game options. And Trey Lance here at $4,800, or Jimmy G is out, although it sounded like early in the week that he was probably going to be out. Now he might be trending in the right direction to play, which sucks. I'm hoping he just takes a week off. Like, they're facing Houston. I think Trey Lance can get the job done here, because if Trey Lance plays, last time he started, he ran the ball over 15 times, had close to 100 rushing yards. It wasn't a great day through the air. He definitely did not have a good day through the air, but that's kind of what Jalen Hurts like. And if he just got a touchdown in that game, he'd be just fine. So Trey Lance, I mean, if he starts, he's your cash game quarterback. I currently have projected, if he was in, just under 20 points, which is by far the best point per dollar option on the slate at the position. But as of right now, we're just kind of waiting and seeing. But it's a great spot versus Houston. They're playing at home. And I would love to play Trey Lance if Jimmy G happened to be out. Moving on to running backs. Up top, you have Jonathan Taylor at $9,000. And it really comes down, do you want to spend up for Cooper Kupp this week or Jonathan Taylor? I am fine with either. Really just depends on your roster construction. I will say if Trey Lance plays, it's way easier to fit these guys in. If Trey Lance is not the starting quarterback for the 49ers on Sunday, it's not as easy to fit in these studs. But Jonathan Taylor obviously in the best spot here. I would say it's probably a downgrade if Carson Wentz happens to be out. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, they'll run the ball more if Carson Wentz is out, which sure they will, but it'll be easier to stack the box against the Colts. But it sounds like with the new guidelines where they went from 10 to 5 days, Carson Wentz could end up playing, so we'll have to wait and see there. But if he does play, I do think that's good for Jonathan Taylor, because it's not like they air the ball anyway. They'll just feed Jonathan Taylor. This is a great matchup on the ground versus the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, I don't think they're going to be able to stop Taylor. He's probably going to get 100-plus rushing yards, probably going to run 20 total touches, hopefully get a couple of passes, 5.5 yards per carry, probably find the end zone, which he does almost every single week. And despite the Raiders being 10th DVA versus the run, they're still only the 3rd most points per game to fantasy running back. So sign me up for Jonathan Taylor if I can afford him. If not, we have some good mid-range options like David Montgomery, $6,500, one of my favorite running backs of the week. I know very low total, 37.5, but that's not bad for a running back as a 6-point favorite at home with a 22-point implied team total. Plus the Giants have not been good versus the run this year. 27th DVOA and 25th versus fantasy running backs. And David Montgomery has been getting a lot of targets recently. On the season, he's averaging 4 targets per game, but if you look at the recent game logs, that has been way up. Like, we've had a couple games close to 10 targets, and if he's going to be utilized like that, like 15-plus carries and 5-plus targets, sign me up for that all day. I mean, especially in a good matchup versus the Giants, and he kind of checks every single box for me this weekend. The price is $6,500 more than it was last week, but that's fine for me. I think it's definitely deserved. So love David Montgomery. Probably going to end up being a core play for me this weekend. Ronald Jones, $6,300. Did get a $1,200 price increase from last week, but that's fine because Vegas DraftKings didn't really know he was going to see the role that he was going to. But if we're going to get around 20-some touches from Ronald Jones versus the Jets defense that is bleeding points to running backs this season, like they are 29th versus the run, but they're dead last in fantasy points allowed per game, 35 points per game, 120 rushing yards, nearly 1.5 rushing touchdowns, and over 6 catches and 55 receiving yards. Like Ronald Jones is going to have the clear Leonard Fournette role. Maybe we might see some Keyshawn Vaughn, which that's fine. Ronald Jones is still the main guy. He's going to be the goal line back. I know the price came up, but I still like Ronald Jones a lot, and he projects very well for me. Rashad Penny had a pretty good day versus the Bears last week, although I hate playing Seattle Seahawks. I just hate that offense. I hate how they utilize their players sometimes. It's just a mess. But they're facing Detroit, another team that's really bad versus the run, so I think Penny is in play. Probably more so in tournaments than cash games, but I do think he's in play nonetheless. DeAndre Swift practiced him fully on Wednesday, so I can only assume he's fully good to go. And it's a good matchup versus Seattle. I wasn't sure if they were going to really rush back DeAndre Swift this season, but assuming he's going to get the normal workload that he had, now maybe he doesn't. Craig Reynolds and some other guys might get involved, but I mean, the prior games to DeAndre Swift getting hurt, he was great for fantasy. Like, he's used in the passing game a lot, which is always amazing. He was seeing an uptick in carries, which, you know, maybe that goes away a little bit, but this is a good matchup versus Seattle, and they're a team that gets kind of killed through the air versus running backs. Over 7 catches and nearly 70 receiving yards per game, allowing the second most points to fantasy running backs. And DeAndre Swift does most of his damage through the air. On the season, close to a 20% target share and over 6 targets per game, so I think Swift, assuming he gets his normal workload, or at least somewhat close to it at $6,000, I will take that all day. Good tournament, maybe cash play if we can get some more news on what the workload's going to look like. Antonio Gibson, $5,900 versus Philly, not a team that's been very good versus running backs so far this season. Like, all these guys pretty much have good matchups, so I'm not sure if I should just keep saying it, but all these teams are facing, besides Sonny Michel versus Baltimore, that's like the only non-cakewalk matchup here, but for the most part, all these guys are in some pretty good spots. Gibson is using the passing game. No J.D. McKissick. Facing Philly, should get around 20 total touches. I don't mind that. Sonny Michel, $5,100. Darrell Henderson is out, so he's on the IR. Now you only have Cam Akers, who, coming off the Achilles injury, we should not expect a big workload whatsoever. Probably just a couple of touches here and there, but I think we get an easy 20-plus touches out of Sonny Michel and some passing game work. So $5,800, I will take that all day. And then Devin Singletary, $5,400, who has seen some more work recently, facing Atlanta, 14.5-point favorites at home. I don't mind it. I hate playing Bills running backs, but in tournaments, I wouldn't mind getting some exposure to Devin Singletary this week, just because of the soft matchup, good game environment for him, and I like the uptick in usage that he's seen. Moving on to wide receivers, as I always say, I try to keep this as simple as possible, because there's always like 20 to 30 wide receivers you could talk about on a given slate. It really comes down to what quarterbacks are you using, what game stacks are you running, who you want to run it back with. So these guys pretty much just correlate with the rest of your lineup. Now, there are some guys I'll one-off in cash games, guys like Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, maybe, obviously Antonio Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Michael Pittman, Joshua Palmer. Like, you can one-off some of these guys in cash games. And some of these guys are kind of tied to the quarterbacks in tournaments for me. Cooper Kupp, I don't really have to tell you why Cooper Kupp's a good play. He's facing Baltimore. They are terrible versus the pass right now. He's very expensive. It's really between him and Jonathan Taylor this week. But if you have the money for Cooper Kupp, by all means, play him with confidence, because he's always going to get you your 20-plus points pretty much every single week. I think Tyreek Hill is a fine tournament play. Travis Kelce will be back, but it's not like it stopped him before. He should get his 10-plus targets, and what should be a competitive back-and-forth, high-scoring game. I'm going to shift this over to their targets so you guys can see their numbers. I don't want to explain each one, but just so it has it on the screen there. We'll pull up their target shares as well. So anyway, going back down, we have Stephon Diggs. If you're using Josh Allen, obviously a great tournament option with him. I'm not really one to one-off Stephon Diggs too much, but if you are stacking the Bills, I think it obviously makes some sense. Keenan Allen finding cash games, no Mike Williams, so I didn't really work out last week versus Houston, which was odd, but he still should get hyper-targeted. 26% target share in the season, close to double-digit targets. A.J. Brown went absolutely off on Thursday night versus the 49ers. Had an incredible game, over 30 fantasy points. Don't know if that's going to happen again, but he should get a lot of targets once again, and I love A.J. Brown. The guy's super talented, $7,200. Should be quite popular. CeeDee Lamb, if you're using Dak Prescott, just pair him up with him. You can also look at Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. T. Higgins, he's a nice run back option with a Chiefs stack, or if you're using Joe Burrow, he's my favorite option to use just because of the price point. Jamar Chase is obviously viable, but he's a little expensive. Jalen Waddle gets targets every single week. Would not be surprised to see 10 plus in this game. Facing Tennessee, a team that has not been good versus fantasy wide receivers this year, so don't mind Jalen Waddle. He's a great PPR guy, and that's what DraftKings is. Antonio Brown is the best receiver on the slate. Honestly, my favorite play on the slate. He currently projects as my wide receiver 3 in terms of fantasy points. I have Cooper Kupp number 1, Stephon Diggs number 2, Antonio Brown number 3, and Tyreek Hill number 4. Like, If you're going to give me the wide receiver 3 at only $6,100, yes, his price did come up over $1,000, but he had 15 targets last week with no Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. There's really no reason to believe you won't see similar utilization. Facing the 32nd DVOA pass defense, sign me up for all the Antonio Brown that I can handle. I imagine he will be the highest owned player in the entire slate, and deservedly so. Amon-Ra St. Brown has been fantastic. Like, he is getting 10 plus targets pretty much every single week the past month now. The quarterback play is not even that good. He's had Tim Boyle, he's had Jared Goff. It's not really stopping him. He looks good, and I don't mind Amon-Ra St. Brown whatsoever. They usually find themselves trailing, so they'll probably have to throw the ball, and St. Brown is definitely taking advantage of that. Michael Pittman, only if Carson Wentz is back. If he is not, I am not playing Michael Pittman, but facing the Raiders defense, I think he's a solid play. 26% target share in the season. Show a lot of targets. Don't mind Pittman at that price point. And if you have to go all the way down low, we have Joshua Palmer, $3,600. No Mike Williams, so it just opens up some more playing time for him, and pretty much going to play all the snaps, so don't mind him if you have to go cheap, because I'm not really finding anybody I like cheap this week. There's a couple stragglers down there that I think are somewhat viable, but Joshua Palmer definitely stands out to me as being the best play down low. And moving on to tight end, I wouldn't say we have a clear-cut chalk tight end this week. It's just really going to come down to your roster construction. Because for me, I'm probably just going to throw in whoever fits at the end unless I'm building a specific tournament lineup. But if I'm going up top, I like Travis Kelce and Rob Gronkowski the most. Travis Kelce seems a bit too cheap at $7,300 returning from the COVID list. Then we have Gronk, who was at a similar price last week. With no Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, you thought he would see a big bump. Didn't really happen. Cameron Brate had a decent game. He got into the end zone, but Rob Gronkowski didn't really do too much until later in the game. But still was not a good day DFS-wise whatsoever for him. But facing the Jets here, should be able to bounce back in a big way. No Chris Godwin, Mike Evans once again. I mean, just only makes sense he'd see an uptick in usage because, for the most part, he's been really good for fantasy this year. So we'll just call that last week as an outlier, and hopefully you can bounce back here if you are spending up for him. Dallas Goedert, Dalton Schultz, pretty similar plays in my opinion. If you're using Jalen Hurts, you can pair him up with Dallas Goedert. You can play Hurts naked, but I do like Goddard quite a bit. Did have a good game last time he faced Washington. And Dalton Schultz, I mean, facing Arizona, it's not the best matchup out there, but if you are using the Cowboys and you want to get kind of off, I'm not going to say CeeDee is going to be chalky this week, but he'll definitely be higher owned. So if you want to get off the chalky Dak to wide receiver stacks, you can just pair him up with Dalton Schultz, and I think that's fine because there's definitely a lot of weeks where Dalton Schultz has some pretty big weeks. And then if you're going cheap, Tyler Higbee, Cole Kmet, CJ Uzomah, really just whoever fits for me, I think is a fine play. I mean, Higbee facing Baltimore has been terrible versus tight ends this year. That's fine. Giants haven't been that great either. And Casey has kind of struggled versus tight ends past couple of years now. But any of these guys are fine. Just really comes down to whoever fits. Now, if it came down to picking between Kmet or Uzomah, I kind of prefer Kmet over Uzomah, although it is quite close. And as far as the defenses go, what I typically do is try to go as cheap as possible. Although this week, there is not like a cheap defense that really stands out to me too much. So if you are spending up, I'll pull up the Vegas totals here, but all these teams do have some pretty low totals against them. Patriots, $3,900. Facing the Jaguars, only a 13.25 implied team total, which I believe is the lowest I have seen all season long. They're playing at home. If you have the money for the Patriots, yeah, they project pretty well this week. Saints versus the Panthers. Sam Darnold will be starting at quarterback this week, only a 16-point implied team total. Bears versus the Giants is probably my favorite spot to go right now. Currently projecting them to be the highest owned defense. Only a 37.5 point over-under. 15.75 implied team total against them. 6-point favorites at home. I like the Bears quite a bit against their quarterback group that's been terrible. And you have the Colts at $2,100 facing the Raiders. They are playing at home, 6.5 point favorites. I will say if Carson Wentz is out, I think it hurts their defense because they probably might find themselves in some worse starting positions on defense. But it sounds like Wentz should be fine. So, I mean, either of these defenses are fine, but I prefer the Bears or Colts just to get that cheaper defense in. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So if you found it helpful and you did enjoy the content, you're going to come back. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll be here all season long. And then once MLB starts up in NASCAR, I'll be breaking those down as well. You can check over the Patreon if you want to get some extra content, although I'd wait until the first of the month to do so because we're near the very end. And if you want to sign up over on PrizePicks, make sure you use code CPENN to get that instant deposit match up to $100. It's free money. Just use it to your advantage. It's very fun to play over there in addition to whatever you do on DraftKings every single weekend. But I think that'll be it. I'll stop rambling. I'll get out of here and I'll see you guys in the next one, which should be tomorrow for the lineup building video.